Welcome back to Critic Cut. We're talking today, finally, about the topic everyone's been waiting for, The Lord of the Rings. So many people have many different opinions on the Lord of the Rings franchise, or if you could say films that have been done. So let's dive into it. First, let's start with the super Tolkien fanboys. Did the Lord of the Rings films do the books justice? And of course, the answer is always going to be to that no, because books are a different storytelling medium than film. Film is a compressed, way of telling stories that there's got to be a certain pacing to film, or it is perceived as boring. Whereas a book can, you look at some of very long novels that have been wildly successful, like the Count of Monte Cristo is a huge novel, but it's still sold well and is one of the classics nowadays. Why? Because just books are a different medium of telling stories. You can take a lot more time with books. It's all in your mind, right? You have to imagine every detail. So the authors will go on for long periods of time talking about different details of the story, but not only that, but they have more time and patience of the audience to develop character far better than films can in the short period of time they have. It's a sad reality, but it's just the reality of filmmaking. So should they have made films at all of the books? And I think the answer is obviously yes, they should have. Could they have done a better job? I don't think so. Not with the original trilogy. I'm not a super big Tolkien guy, but from the way the stories are told, I think it was a way to bring these stories to the masses. There's many people who probably wouldn't have read the books if it wasn't for the films. I know many people who had no idea about Tolkien before they watched the films, and because they liked the movies, they went and read the books. It can draw a lot of people to the original artworks, but also I thought Peter Jackson, who I've talked about before, is one of my favorite directors. He just did a great job telling these stories. For that medium, I don't think you could have told the story better than he did. He has such a great visual style that matches the fantasy world, and the visual effects were groundbreaking for that time. Especially with Gollum, the motion capture they did was beyond its time and really paved the way for modern motion capture that we have today. That Peter Jackson company, Weta Digital, has always been one of the front runners in pushing this technology forward, especially with motion capture. So I mean, if it wasn't for those films, a lot of the better effects we have today wouldn't have been possible. So were they too long? I don't think so, because the books are long. I mean, they're not super long, but it's just to do the story some justice, you have to have a certain amount of time that it's like, okay, you've at least done the story justice. And I think striking that balance can be hard for film to because it is that compressed medium of telling stories that you gotta do what you gotta do, but you also want to be faithful to the narrative, evoke the same emotions, and sadly that means cutting characters sometimes. I know a lot of Tolkien fans are really upset about that, but it happens, and it has to happen to be able to bring these to cinema. But I think you just gotta appreciate them individually. People who compare the books, movies, and stuff, I think are missing the point, is that these artworks are somewhat independent of one another, as well as being, both telling the same story, that it's two different ways of telling the same story. If you have a interesting life experience, you might tell your friends that story differently than you might tell your employer. It's the same story, but it's just two different ways of telling it, and two different audiences, honestly. Like, a lot of book people may not be super into movies, and a lot of movie people aren't into books. In a way that they're independent, but also, you gotta stay true to the original artwork in a sense too, when you're, building off of someone else's intellectual property, their world that they've created, and doing it justice. So it's kind of striking that balance. And that's my biggest problem why I didn't watch Rings of Power, was because everything I saw of it, I didn't even want it to be ruined in my mind for just that world. From what I heard, they just didn't honor Tolkien's legacy that well. From these rumors of an upcoming Narnia series, I'm like, I just roll my eyes, because even the feature films they did weren't too bad, but they still weren't as great as the Lord of the Rings films, and I think paying tribute to the original work of art. So I'm not looking forward to that. What do you think? Do you like the Lord of the Rings films? Do you hate them? Let me know in the comments below, and as always, tell good stories.